New York City, the sun was setting over the skyline, painting the tall buildings in shades of orange and purple. The city, vibrant and alive, never seemed to stop moving, always buzzing with energy. Yet, in the sleek and modern apartment of Katherine Reynolds, the lights were dimmed, and the silence felt heavier than it ever had before. Katherine sat in the spacious living room, her fingers tracing the rim of a half-empty glass of wine. The air was thick with tension, and her thoughts weighed heavily on her mind. She had just returned home from a late meeting with investors, discussing the next big financial project for her company. Everything was going well. Too well, maybe. She had it all, the success, the respect, the power. But somehow, as she stared out at the sprawling city, it felt like something was missing. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Lucas, her husband of 6 years. "We need to talk." Katherine stared at the message, her heart sinking. She knew what it meant. Lucas had been hinting at it for weeks now, the same conversation they'd been putting off. For so long, she set the glass down, took a deep breath, and picked up the phone to reply, "I'm home, let's talk." A few minutes later, Lucas stepped into the apartment. He was still in his scrubs, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. As a renowned surgeon, his schedule was just as demanding as hers, if not more. But despite the late hour, he seemed alert, his jaw tight and his eyes filled with an intensity that Katherine couldn't quite place. He walked over to the sofa and sat down beside her. They exchanged a brief glance before Lucas spoke. "Katherine, I've been thinking," he began, his voice softer than usual. "It's been a while since we've talked about having kids. You've been so focused on your career, and I get it. I really do. But I'm starting to feel like we're missing out on something." Katherine felt her stomach tighten. She knew this conversation was coming, but hearing the words out loud made her uncomfortable. She had always focused on her work. Her career had been her dream, her lifeblood. The idea of bringing a child into that equation felt overwhelming. "No," Katherine said slowly, trying to choose her words carefully. "I've been focused on the company, Lucas. There's so much at stake right now, and you know how hard it is for me to balance everything." "I get that," Lucas replied, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm not just talking about balance. I'm talking about the future, us, the family we've talked about for years. I want to be a father, Katherine. I want to build that part of our life, and I think we're ready. We can't keep putting it off forever." Katherine swallowed hard, looking away for a moment as she tried to process his words. The truth was, she wasn't sure if she was ready. Her career had always come first, and the thought of adding a child into the mix was both exciting and terrifying. She turned back to Lucas, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. "I want that too," she said quietly, her voice laced with uncertainty, "but I'm not sure I can handle both. I've worked so hard to get where I am, Lucas, and I don't know how much I'm willing to sacrifice for this." Lucas reached over and gently took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "You don't have to sacrifice anything, Katherine. We'll figure it out together. But I think we both know that if we don't take this step now, we may never get the chance. The longer we wait, the more time we lose." Katherine looked down at their intertwined fingers, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had always prided herself on being independent, on building a life that was hers. But in that moment, she realized something. She had built her empire, but she had also built a wall around herself, a wall that kept others, even Lucas, at a distance. She had been so focused on her work, her career, that she had forgotten what it was like to dream of something bigger, something outside of financial spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Could she really balance both? Could she build a family and maintain her success? "I don't know, Lucas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've worked so hard for everything I have, and I'm scared of losing it all. I'm scared of not being able to be the mother I want to be while still being the leader of this company." Lucas's gaze softened, and he gently lifted her chin so she was looking into his eyes. "Katherine, you don't have to do this alone. We'll figure it out. You're not going to lose everything. You're going to gain something even more important, a family." A lump formed in Katherine's throat, and she blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. For the first time, she realized that Lucas wasn't just asking her to have a baby, he was asking her to trust him, to trust that they could navigate the challenges of life together. She wasn't alone in this. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling, but ... maybe we can do this. Maybe we can try." Lucas smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We don't have to have it all figured out right now. Let's just take it one step at a time." Katherine nodded, the weight of her decision still heavy, but, for the first time in a long while, feeling a sense of hope. She wasn't sure how it would all work out, but with Lucas by her side, she was ready to take that step. New York City, the morning was quiet. The city below was already waking up, the streets buzzing with life. But in Katherine Reynolds' penthouse, it was still early, and the silence felt heavier than it should. Katherine sat in front of her vanity mirror, staring at her reflection. Her dark hair was neatly pinned back, and she wore a simple black dress, one of the many she wore for work. But this morning, she didn't feel like herself. She didn't feel like the powerful CEO that had once commanded respect from everyone. Around her, she felt tired, weighed down by the decision she had to make. She had spent the last few days considering the idea of starting a family. The idea of having a child had always been something she pushed aside, thinking it would come later when she was ready. But with Lucas's insistence, the reality of it was starting to sink in. Could she truly have it all? Could she balance the pressure of leading one of the top financial firms in the country and being a mother? Her mind raced with questions and doubts. "Are you ready for this?" she whispered to herself. That afternoon, Lucas came home after his long shift at the hospital. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty apartment, and Katherine couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. It was clear that something had shifted between them. Their conversations had become shorter, more strained. Their nights, together once filled with laughter and intimacy, had been replaced with silence. She looked up from her desk as Lucas walked in, his tired eyes meeting hers. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey," he said softly, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. "How was your day?" Katherine tried to smile, but the weight of the conversation they needed to have hung in the air like a storm. "Cloud, busy as always," she replied, her voice neutral. Same old, same old. How about you?" Lucas sighed as he sank down onto the couch. "The hospital's been crazy. It's been non-stop all week, but I'm glad to be home." Katherine stood up and walked over to him, sitting down beside him. There was an undeniable tension between them, something unspoken. A rift had formed, and neither of them knew how to fix it. They had been so focused on their careers that they had forgotten how to connect with each other. "I've been thinking," Katherine began, breaking the silence, "about what we talked about having kids." Lucas turned to her, his expression softening. I know you've been stressed, Katherine. I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. Katherine nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she ran them through her hair. It's not that I'm not ready, Lucas. I don't know how we can balance everything. I'm the CEO of Reynolds Financial, and that takes all of me. How do we find time for a child in the middle of all this? I don't want to fail at being a mother, but I don't want to fail at being who I am either. Lucas reached for her hand, holding it gently. I don't think you'll fail at anything, Katherine. You're already doing so much. But we can make this work. We always do. She shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. I'm not sure, Lucas. We're not just talking about balancing work and life. We're talking about bringing a new life into this world. I don't want to have a child just to have them grow up neglected because I'm too busy working. I understand, Lucas said, his voice gentle but firm. But maybe we've been so focused on our individual success that we've forgotten about the bigger picture. It's not about being perfect, Katherine. It's about being together as a family. We'll make it work, even if it's hard. Katherine felt a lump form in her throat as his words settled in her heart. She had always prided herself on being independent, on building a life for herself. But maybe Lucas was right. Maybe it was time to stop building everything alone. Maybe it was time to start building something together. I don't want to lose myself, Lucas, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for, but I don't want to lose us either. Lucas gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. You won't lose yourself, Katherine. We'll find a way to do both. We can have a family, and you can still pursue your dreams. It'll be tough, but we're in this together, and I'll be there every step of the way. Katherine closed her eyes, taking in the comfort of his touch. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. She had always tried to control everything, but now she realized that sometimes letting go and trusting someone else was the hardest yet most necessary step. Together, she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. Lucas smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. Together. That night, after dinner, Katherine sat in the living room with a glass of wine in hand, staring out at the city lights. The decision still loomed over her, but there was something different in the air now. She wasn't alone in this. Lucas had reminded her of what truly mattered, not just success, but the life they could build together. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be sacrifices along the way, but they could make it work. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to embrace the life she had been so afraid to live. A life where she could still be the CEO, still be successful, but also be a mother, a wife, and a woman who embraced all the roles life had to offer. For the first time in a long while, Katherine allowed herself to smile. It wasn't a smile of certainty, but one of hope. The future was uncertain, but she was ready to face it with Lucas by her side. New York City, the city that never sleeps, Katherine thought, as she stood by the large window in her office, staring out at the skyline. It was a busy Thursday afternoon, and the streets below were teeming with people rushing to their destinations. Just like she had for years. Her life had been a constant cycle of meetings, calls, and deadlines. Yet, now, in the silence of her office, a different kind of decision loomed over her. It had been a week since her conversation with Lucas, a week since they had discussed the possibility of having children. The weight of that conversation had stayed with her like a shadow following her every move. She had tried to push it aside, focusing on the daily grind of her work. But it kept resurfacing, creeping into her thoughts during the quiet moments. Could she really have it all? Could she be the CEO, the powerhouse of her company, and still be a mother, a wife? She had always prided herself on being able to handle anything life threw at her. But this was different. This wasn't about making a deal or closing a major financial transaction. This was about something far more personal, something that could change everything. Katherine exhaled slowly, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. She had always put her career first, and it had brought her success, but at what cost? Her marriage had been strained, her connection with Lucas had dwindled over the years, and now, the idea of having children seemed like an impossible task, especially with the demands of her job. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Lucas. "Dinner tonight. I think we need to talk. About us." Her heart skipped a beat. The conversation they had been avoiding for months was finally about to happen. She had known it was coming, but now that it was here, she didn't feel ready. She wasn't ready to face the reality of what might be lost. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the control she had built her life around. She typed a quick response. "I'll be home by 7, as she prepared to leave the office. Katherine couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settling in her stomach. This wasn't just another conversation about work or daily life. This was about their future, the future they had put off for so long, and Katherine wasn't sure if she was ready to make the kind of decision that would change everything that evening. Katherine and Lucas's apartment. Katherine arrived home to find the apartment bathed in soft, warm light. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in front of him, his gaze fixed on the table. He didn't look up when she entered. "Hey," Katherine said softly, her voice tentative. Lucas looked up, offering her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey, you hungry?" She nodded and sat down across from him. The familiar quiet between them hung in the air, both of them knowing that this conversation was long overdue. "I've been thinking a lot," Lucas began, his voice heavy with emotion. "About us, about the future. I know it's not easy, but I want you to know I'm not rushing you into anything. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when I feel like we're drifting further apart." Katherine's throat tightened. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel so real. "I know, Lucas," she said quietly. "I feel it too, but it's not just about us. It's about everything else. I'm so focused on my career, and I'm scared that I won't be able to do both. I won't be able to be the mother I want to be and still run this company. I don't know if I can balance everything." Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to balance it all by yourself, Katherine. We can do this together. We've built everything together up until now. Why can't we build a family too?" She felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "I'm just so scared, Lucas. I'm scared of losing control, of losing everything I've worked for. I've spent my whole life building this empire. But what happens if I can't have both? What if I can't be a good mother and still be successful?" Lucas squeezed her hand, his eyes softening. "You don't have to choose between the two. You don't have to lose yourself in this. We'll find a way, and I'll be with you every step of the way. But we can't keep waiting. We have to decide what we want out of life, Katherine. I want us to have a family. I want us to be happy." Katherine felt the weight of his words sink in. She had always been so afraid of losing control, of admitting that she couldn't do everything on her own. But in that moment, she realized that maybe the true test wasn't in how much she could achieve, but in how much she could allow herself to trust. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready, Lucas, but ... I want to try. I want to build a life with you. I want to be a mother. I just don't know if I can do it all. Lucas smiled, a warmth spreading across his face. We don't have to do it all, Katherine. We just have to do it together. That night, after dinner, Katherine lay in bed, her thoughts racing. She still wasn't sure if she had made the right decision. The fear of losing control still lingered in the back of her mind. But as she looked over at Lucas, sleeping peacefully beside her, she realized that the future wasn't something she could plan down to the last detail. It was something she would have to live, step by step. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it. Together. New York City, the days seemed to blur together as Katherine Reynolds tried to juggle the overwhelming demands of her job with the growing realization that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't control. The decision to have a child, to build a family with Lucas, had brought with it an undercurrent of anxiety she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, she was forced to confront the very thing she had always tried to avoid, the feeling of being stretched too thin, the fear of failure, and the possibility of losing the only thing that had ever defined her career. As the days passed, her pregnancy began to show, and with it came the inevitable physical and emotional changes. The morning sickness, the fatigue, the constant worry about how she would handle the delicate balance of her life. Katherine had never felt more vulnerable. Her office, once her sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. The endless meetings, the phone calls, and the pressure to maintain the company's success were taking their toll. She could feel the tension rising in her shoulders as she worked late into the night, trying to keep up with the workload while also preparing for the reality of motherhood. One evening, after yet another long day at the office, Katherine sat at her desk, staring at the pile of reports in front of her. Her phone buzzed on the corner of the desk, and she saw Lucas's name appear on the screen. "Hey, Katherine," Lucas said when she answered. His voice was warm, but there was a hint of concern in it. "How are you feeling today?" She sighed, rubbing her temples, tired, exhausted, actually. "I don't think I've ever worked this hard in my life. The pregnancy is making everything harder to handle, and the company, it's not slowing down. The investors are breathing down my neck, and I feel like I'm losing control of everything." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Katherine," Lucas said softly, "you don't have to do this all on your own. I've been telling you this for months now. You need to take a step back." Katherine felt a pang of frustration. "I can't, Lucas. I have to do this. This is my career. My life. I can't just walk away from it now. If I don't keep pushing, everything will fall apart." "You don't have to do it all alone, Katherine," Lucas repeated, his voice firm. "We're in this together. I can't take away the work stress, but I can help you with other things. You need to let me help." Katherine paused, feeling the weight of his words. "I don't know how, Lucas. I've spent my entire life fighting for this success. I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough as a mother? What if I fail at both?" "You won't fail," Lucas said, his tone gentle but reassuring. "You're stronger than you think, and I'm here. We're going to figure this out together." Katherine stared at the phone in her hand, a mix of frustration and vulnerability swirling inside her. She had always been so in control, so sure of herself. But now, the future felt uncertain. And, for the first time, she realized that maybe she didn't have to do it all on her own. "I know," she said quietly, her voice softening, "but it's hard to let go, Lucas. It's hard to let someone else take the reins." Lucas's voice softened in response. "I get that. But, Katherine, we can't keep pushing ourselves to the brink. This is too much. You need to take care of yourself, and you need to take care of us, our family. Everything else will fall into place. Trust me." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words sinking in. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try." The next day was one of those rare moments when Katherine wasn't completely consumed by work. She had decided to take a half day, something she hadn't done in months, to visit her doctor for a routine checkup. The quiet walk to the clinic felt surreal to her, like she was stepping out of the chaos of her life and into something much more personal, something she couldn't control. Sitting in the waiting room, Katherine couldn't help but notice the mothers and fathers coming in and out, the parents who looked both excited and exhausted. The thought of joining them, of being a mother, felt both terrifying and beautiful. But more than anything, it made her realize that she had never truly stopped to think about what she wanted for herself. Outside of work, when her name was called, she stood up, her legs feeling like lead. She followed the nurse into the examination room, where the doctor greeted her with a warm smile. "How are you feeling today, Katherine?" Dr. Harper asked, jotting something down in her notes. "Tired," Katherine admitted, sitting on the examination table. "I'm struggling to balance everything. Work is overwhelming, and I don't know how to do this. I don't want to be a bad mother, but I also don't want to lose myself in the process." Dr. Harper looked at her, her eyes kind but firm. "You're going through a lot right now. Pregnancy can be physically and emotionally taxing, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed. But remember, being a good parent doesn't mean being perfect. It means being present, being there for your child, and you will find your balance. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen." Katherine nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "I hope so," she whispered. Dr. Harper smiled kindly. "I'm sure of it. You're strong, Katherine. You've got this." That night, when Katherine returned home, she found Lucas waiting for her in the kitchen. The apartment was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the refrigerator. "Hey," he said softly, standing as she entered. "How did the appointment go?" Katherine smiled faintly, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. "It went well. Everything's fine. The doctor said it's normal to feel overwhelmed. But I think I'm starting to see what you mean. I don't have to do it all alone." Lucas stepped closer, pulling her into a hug. "You never have to, Katherine. We're in this together." Katherine closed her eyes, letting herself relax into the embrace. She had spent so many years building her empire, trying to be everything to everyone. But maybe, just maybe, she could start building something new, a family. A life that was more than just work. A life that was about love, connection, and balance. She pulled away slightly, looking up at Lucas with a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I'm ready to try, to have it all." Lucas smiled, his eyes soft with affection. "And we'll do it together." New York City, the soft glow of the morning sun seeped through the curtains of Katherine's bedroom, casting a warm golden light across the room. It was an unusually quiet morning, the city outside still waking up as Katherine lay in bed, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. It had been weeks since she had made the decision to try for a child. The decision itself hadn't come easily, but there was a sense of clarity in her mind now she was ready for this new chapter. Or at least, she thought she was. The more she thought about it, the more the reality of what was coming began to settle in. She ran a hand over her stomach, a quiet gesture that felt both comforting and daunting at the same time. Being a mother was a role she had always imagined for herself, but now, with the weight of her responsibilities at Reynolds Financial, it felt like she was about to step into unknown territory. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at it and saw Lucas's name flashing across the screen. The sudden rush of emotions made her stomach tighten. They had spent the past few days barely talking, both of them consumed by their separate worlds. "Hey, Lucas," she answered, her voice soft. "Morning, Katherine." Lucas's voice came through, calm but with an undertone of concern. "I've been thinking about you. How are you feeling today?" Katherine took a deep breath, sitting up in bed. "I'm okay, just ... a little overwhelmed, I guess. I've been thinking a lot about everything. The company, the baby. I feel like I'm barely keeping everything together." "I get it," Lucas replied, his voice gentle. "But remember, you don't have to do it alone. You've been carrying this weight for so long. It's time to let others help you." Katherine smiled faintly, feeling a sense of relief in his words. But deep down, she wasn't sure she could allow herself to depend on anyone, especially now when her life seemed to be in flux. She had spent so much time building her career, climbing the ladder, achieving success on her own. How could she just let go of that? "I know, but it's hard, Lucas," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "It's hard to let go of everything I've worked for. I've always been in control, and now I feel like I don't know how to handle all of this." Lucas's voice softened. "You don't have to give up your career, Katherine. You're allowed to have it all. We just have to figure out how, and we'll do that together." She sat quietly for a moment, listening to the comforting sound of his voice. His reassurance was exactly what she needed, but it also made her realize how much she had been holding back. The fear, the doubts, the uncertainty had all built up inside her, and now she had to confront it. She couldn't keep pretending like she had everything under control. "I've been so focused on proving myself in the business world, Lucas," she whispered. "I didn't realize how much I was sacrificing in the process. I've put my work ahead of everything else, ... and now I'm not sure how to balance it all." Lucas was silent for a beat, and then he spoke again, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "I know you're scared, Katherine, but you're not alone in this. You don't have to sacrifice who you are, what you've built, but you also don't have to carry the world on your shoulders. Let's face this together, as a team." Katherine closed her eyes, her hand resting on her stomach. She felt the weight of his words sink in, and for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the fear she had been trying to suppress, the fear of losing control, the fear of losing herself. But she also realized something in that moment, maybe. The key wasn't in trying to control everything. Maybe it was about finding trust and balance. "I want to believe that, Lucas," she said, her voice quieter. "I want to believe I can have it all. I just ... I don't know how yet." "You'll figure it out," Lucas said, his voice filled with conviction, "and I'll be here every step of the way." Later that day, Katherine found herself sitting in her office, staring at the piles of reports and emails that demanded her attention. She had spent most of the morning on the phone with investors, working through the complications of a new project that had the potential to take her company to the next level. But despite the excitement, she couldn't shake the sense of unease. The truth was, she had always put her work first, always focused on achieving more, climbing higher, proving herself. But now, with the prospect of a baby on the horizon, she realized that she had to make a choice. The path she had been walking couldn't continue forever without consequences. If she didn't find a way to integrate her personal life with her career, someone would always be sacrificed. As she leaned back in her chair, Katherine realized that her decision wasn't just about choosing between work and family. It was about redefining what success meant to her. Success was no longer about simply achieving more in her career. It was about creating a life that was fulfilling on every level. A life where she could be both a powerful CEO and a loving mother. A wife who was present and connected. The door to her office creaked open, and Olivia, one of her trusted colleagues, stepped inside. Katherine quickly wiped the stray tear from her cheek, but Olivia had already noticed. "Katherine, are you okay?" Olivia asked, her tone gentle. Katherine nodded, forcing a smile. Just ... thinking. A lot of decisions to make, you know. Olivia nodded knowingly. "I get it. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. We're all in this together." Katherine smiled, grateful for Olivia's support. She had always been there for her, in both the good and bad times. But this was different. This time, it was Katherine's turn to lean on others. "Thanks, Olivia," Katherine said, her voice steadying. "I appreciate it." As Olivia left the room, Katherine sat back in her chair and took a deep breath. There was still so much uncertainty, so many decisions to be made. But for the first time, Katherine allowed herself to feel a sense of peace. She didn't have to have all the answers today. She didn't have to do everything on her own. She was ready to face the future, not just as a CEO, but as a mother, a wife, and a woman who had finally found the balance between success and happiness. New York City, the hustle and bustle of Manhattan, felt different this morning. The usual rush of cars and pedestrians, the noise of the city, seemed distant as Katherine Reynolds made her way to the office. She had made a decision. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't one she had come to lightly. But it was the right one. She had promised herself that she would find a way to balance her career and family. But today, as she walked down the familiar corridors of Reynolds Financial, she wasn't just thinking about quarterly earnings or the latest investment deal. She was thinking about what really mattered. She was thinking about Lucas, about the child they were planning to have together, and about herself, her own identity, and how she could stop losing herself in the pursuit of success. Katherine had always been a woman of ambition. Her drive had gotten her to the top, but somewhere along the way it had overshadowed everything else. Her relationships, her personal life, even her happiness. But now she realized that success wasn't just about climbing higher and achieving more. It was about creating a life that felt whole, a life where she could be everything she wanted to be, a successful CEO, a loving wife, and a present mother. As she walked into her office, she was greeted by the usual rush of work, but today, something felt different. She wasn't just going through the motions. She had made a commitment to herself, and it was time to follow through. Later that afternoon, Katherine found herself sitting across from her team in a strategy meeting. They were discussing the company's upcoming plans, a major expansion into international markets. The stakes were high, and everyone around the table was eager to move forward. "Okay, let's get started," Katherine said, her voice steady and confident. The international market is our next frontier. We've made great progress, but we need to solidify our position." Her colleagues nodded in agreement. Katherine was sharp as ever, her business acumen clear. But even as she spoke, her mind wandered. She couldn't help but wonder how much longer she could keep up the relentless pace. She knew that her focus on the company had allowed her to achieve greatness. But now, it felt like it was time to shift her priorities. She couldn't afford to let the company consume her life any longer. She had to trust her team to step up and share the load. "I've been thinking," she continued, "we need to bring in more senior leadership for the international expansion. I can't manage every facet of this operation alone. I want us to focus on collaboration and delegation, which will allow me to focus on the long-term vision." There were murmurs of agreement around the table. Katherine wasn't just talking about delegation in the company. She was talking about delegation in her life. She had been holding everything together by sheer willpower for years. But she knew it was time to start letting go, to trust others more. That evening, Katherine came home to a quiet apartment. Lucas had worked late again at the hospital, and for a brief moment, she felt a pang of loneliness. She missed the intimacy they used to share, the laughter, the quiet moments together, the plans they made. But now, there was something different. Their lives had become so intertwined with their careers that they had lost sight of what had brought them together in the first place. Katherine walked into the kitchen, where she found Lucas pouring himself a glass of water. He looked up when she entered, and for a brief moment their eyes met. "Hey," she said softly, walking toward him. "Hey," Lucas replied, his voice a little weary, but there was warmth in his gaze. "Long day?" Katherine nodded, leaning against the counter. "Yeah, but I made a decision today. I'm going to start delegating more. Let go of some of the control. I can't keep doing it all." Lucas raised an eyebrow, setting the glass of water down. "What does that mean?" Katherine smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders as she said it aloud. "It means I'm going to trust others more, and I'm going to start focusing on what matters outside of work. We're going to have a family, Lucas, and that means I need to be present, not just physically, but mentally too." Lucas smiled, walking over to her and pulling her into a hug. "I'm proud of you, Katherine. I've been waiting for you to realize that. We've been so focused on everything else that we've forgotten about us." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the comfort of his embrace. "I don't want to lose you, Lucas. I don't want to lose what we've built." "You won't," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll figure it out together. I'm not going anywhere." The following weeks were filled with adjustments. Katherine started delegating more responsibilities to her team, trusting her colleagues to take on bigger roles in the company's operations. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments of doubt, moments when she felt the old urge to take control, but with Lucas's support, she learned to step back and let others handle things. At home, things slowly started to shift as well. They found time to spend together, even if it was just a quiet dinner at home. Katherine and Lucas talked more openly about their plans for the future, and for the first time in a long time, they felt connected again. Katherine knew it wasn't going to be easy. Balancing a career and family would always be a challenge. But with each passing day, she felt more confident in her ability to navigate it all. She didn't have to choose between work and family. She could have both, as long as she was willing to trust in herself and in the people who were there to support her. And as she stood at the window one evening, looking out at the city she had fought so hard to conquer, Katherine realized that success wasn't about controlling everything. It was about learning to let go, to trust, and to build something meaningful with the people who mattered most. New York City, the early morning fog had yet to lift, and the city's energy had not yet fully taken hold. It was the weekend, but Katherine Reynolds couldn't remember the last time she'd had a real weekend. Even as she sat in her kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air, her mind was still occupied with the endless lists, deadlines, and decisions waiting for her at the office. For the past few months, Katherine had been trying to balance her pregnancy with the intense demands of being CEO of Reynolds Financial, but the truth was, it wasn't going well. She had hoped to take time for herself, to prepare for the baby, but work never stopped. The company needed her. The pressure was unrelenting. The decision to become a mother hadn't been easy, but it had been something she had agreed to with Lucas. She wanted a family. She wanted the joy that came with raising a child. But in the midst of all the uncertainty, she was realizing just how unprepared she felt. Every part of her life seemed to be on the edge of tipping over. Her body was changing, her emotions fluctuating, and her career, which had been her identity for so long, was now something she feared. She couldn't manage. Lucas had been patient with her understanding, but she could sense his growing frustration. He, too, was juggling his work at the hospital, and their lives seemed to be running in two different directions. Katherine's phone buzzed with a new message from Lucas. "Dinner at 7 tonight. I think we need to talk about what's going on." The words sent a chill through her, and she hesitated before replying. "I'll be home at 7. For the first time in weeks, Katherine allowed herself to put down her work. She wasn't sure if she could still continue the facade that everything was fine: her family life, her career, her future. But the question that weighed on her now was simple. Could she really do both? Could she balance motherhood with the ambition she had spent so many years building? That evening, the tension in the apartment was palpable. The usual comfort of their home seemed to have disappeared, replaced with an unspoken uncertainty. Katherine sat at the kitchen table, fiddling with her glass of wine, her mind racing with thoughts of the conversation she and Lucas were about to have. When Lucas walked in, his tired face softened when he saw her, but there was an underlying tension in his posture. He had been working long shifts at the hospital, and Katherine knew the strain it was putting on him. Their paths had become so disconnected, but tonight they would have to bridge the gap. "Katherine," Lucas began, his voice calm but carrying a weight of concern. "I've been thinking about everything, about us." Katherine looked at him, her stomach twisting. "I know, I've been thinking, too." He sat down across from her, leaning forward. "I don't want to keep pushing you. I understand that your career is important to you, but I feel like we're losing each other. And now with the baby on the way, I think it's time we figure out where we stand. How we're going to do this." Katherine's chest tightened. She had feared this moment. The truth was, she didn't have the answers he was looking for. She didn't even have answers for herself. "I don't know how, Lucas," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to balance all of this. I don't know how to be the CEO, the wife, and soon, the mother." Lucas reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "I know this is a lot, Katherine, but we don't have to do it all at once. I'm not asking you to figure it out today, but I need you to know that we're in this together. You don't have to do it alone." Katherine squeezed his hands, feeling the warmth of his reassurance, but the weight of her doubt still lingered. She had always been so driven, so focused on her career. Could she really give herself fully to motherhood and family without losing who she was? "I don't want to lose myself," Katherine said quietly, her voice shaking. "I've worked so hard for this, Lucas. I don't know if I'm ready to change everything." Lucas stood up and walked around to her, his presence strong yet gentle. He knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not losing yourself, Katherine. You're expanding yourself. You're going to be a mother, and you're still going to be the amazing woman you are. I've seen what you've built, what you've achieved, and that doesn't just disappear. But we can't keep going like this. We need to make space for both." Katherine looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in his words, the hope for their future. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time it wasn't out of fear or doubt. It was a tear of acceptance. "I don't know how, but I'm willing to try, Lucas. I'm willing to try to find a balance. I just don't know what it looks like yet." Lucas smiled, pulling her into an embrace. "We'll figure it out, together, one step at a time." The following days were full of adjustments, both big and small. Katherine began to delegate more. At work, trusting her team to take on some of the responsibilities she had been holding on to so tightly. She also made a conscious effort to carve out time for Lucas, even if it meant stepping away from the office early or turning off her phone when she got home. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, but she could see the difference. In their relationship, they were talking more, connecting more, and for the first time in a long time, Katherine started to believe that maybe she could have it all. New York City, the first signs of spring were just beginning to show. The city was waking up from the cold winter, and the streets were filled with the fresh scent of blooming flowers. For Katherine Reynolds, however, the change in seasons wasn't the only thing that marked a fresh start. It had been 2 months since she made the decision to embrace both motherhood and her career, and while the balance was still a work in progress, she could feel a shift in herself. She had finally started to give herself permission to take breaks, to lean on Lucas, and to delegate at work. And most importantly, she felt a quiet sense of peace starting to settle over her. But with the arrival of the baby just around the corner, she was facing the inevitable challenge of how to manage her role as both CEO and mother. Her body was beginning to show the physical signs of pregnancy, and she had been experiencing more fatigue than ever before. Yet, the weight of what was ahead of balancing 2 lives, of making room for love, family, and success was something she could no longer ignore. Katherine's office to 9 a.m. The morning meeting was intense, as always. Reynolds Financial had been working on a large investment project, and the pressure from the investors was mounting. Katherine sat at the head of the table, listening to the updates from her team, trying her best to stay focused. But her mind kept drifting, thinking about the baby's room still in need of a few finishing touches, the prenatal classes she and Lucas had signed up for, and the logistics of how everything was going to change when the baby finally arrived. Her team was presenting their projections for the next quarter, but the numbers on the screen seemed to blur as Katherine's thoughts wandered. She had been doing this for years, driving the company forward, but now her focus was divided. Her body, her mind, and her heart were all being pulled in different directions. "Everything looks good here," Olivia, her senior strategist, said, pointing to the data on the screen. "The projections are steady, but we're going to need to scale up quickly if we want to meet the demand." Katherine blinked, quickly snapping back into the conversation. "Right, yeah, I agree. Let's move forward with the plan. But we'll need to check the logistics again. Can we set up another round of meetings to finalize the details? Of course, Olivia replied, taking notes. Katherine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all. She had spent years building this empire, but now she felt the weight of responsibility in an entirely new way. Her thoughts were always with the company, but her heart was now torn between the future of her business and the future she was about to create with Lucas. Later, that evening, Katherine and Lucas's apartment. Katherine sat on the couch, her legs stretched out in front of her, her laptop resting on her lap. Lucas walked in from his shift at the hospital, his face tired but soft as he smiled at her. "How was your day?" he asked. Dropping his bag by the door, Katherine closed her laptop and sighed. "Busy, same as usual. I've been working on the project for next quarter, and it's exhausting trying to keep up with everything. I feel like I'm constantly juggling." Lucas sat next to her, his hand resting on her belly as he kissed her forehead. "I know it's hard, Katherine, but we're going to get through this. You're doing an amazing job." Katherine smiled faintly, but the exhaustion in her eyes was obvious. "It doesn't feel like it. I feel like I'm being pulled in so many different directions. Work, family, the baby, there's never enough time." "You're doing the best you can," Lucas said softly, "and you're not alone in this. You've got me, and when the baby comes, we'll figure it out together." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes closing as she let out a sigh. "I just don't want to fail. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for. But at the same time, I can't imagine not being there for our child. I feel so torn." "Listen to me," Lucas said, lifting her chin so that she looked at him. "You don't have to choose between being a mother and being the CEO. You can be both. But you need to give yourself permission to let go of some of the pressure you've been carrying. You don't have to do it all." Katherine looked at him, feeling the tears well up in her eyes. For so long, she had convinced herself that she had to do it all. She had built a career from nothing, pushed herself harder than anyone else, and kept the world at arm's length. But now, the idea of having a child, of being a family, made her realize that there was more to life than just work. "I'm trying, Lucas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying to trust that we can make this work. I just don't know if I can balance it all." "You will," Lucas reassured her, his voice warm. "We'll figure it out together, I promise." Katherine closed her eyes and leaned into his embrace, finally letting go of some of the tension she had been holding inside. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything alone. The next day, Katherine woke up early, feeling more rested than she had in weeks. She had made a decision, was going to try to find a balance. No more letting her career dominate every waking moment. No more sacrificing her happiness for the next deal, the next big project. She could be a great CEO, but she could also be a great mother, a loving wife. It was time to stop compartmentalizing her life. She could have both, but it would take effort, trust, and the willingness to ask for help. Later that week, a team meeting at Reynolds Financial. Katherine stood at the front of the conference room, addressing her team. Her colleagues looked to her for guidance, but for the first time in a long time, Katherine felt confident in her ability to lead, not because she was perfect, but because she had embraced her imperfections. "I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed as a company," she began. "We've had our struggles, but I'm proud of what we've achieved so far. As we move forward, we're going to focus on growth, but we're also going to focus on balance. This company has always been about innovation, but now we're going to innovate how we work, how we support each other, and how we support ourselves." Her team looked at her with renewed respect. There was a sense of unity in the room, a feeling that they could tackle anything together. "I'll be leaning on all of you more," she continued, "and I'll be trusting you to take the lead in areas where I've been too hands-on. It's time for me to step back a little. I can't do everything on my own anymore. I have to be there for my family too. But that doesn't mean I'm stepping away. It means we're stepping forward together." New York City, the days were growing warmer, and the city, ever alive, buzzed with energy. But for Katherine Reynolds, the only thing that felt like a constant was the quiet hum of her thoughts. Her pregnancy was advancing, and the physical changes were becoming more apparent. She was tired. Her body was slowing down, and she could feel the exhaustion creeping in. Despite the joy she had over the baby on the way, the balance she had tried so hard to find was still out of reach. Her days at Reynolds Financial had become increasingly challenging. The demands of being a CEO were not easing up. In fact, as the company moved forward with its expansion plans, Katherine found herself struggling to keep pace with the responsibilities at work. She had delegated much, but there were still decisions only she could make. And every moment spent away from the office felt like a failure, a missed opportunity, a decision not made. Her phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her back to reality. It was a reminder for her next meeting, and she sighed, staring at the screen. She had been doing this for years, leading, strategizing, making decisions on the fly. But now, as the time for the baby's arrival loomed closer, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways that were both terrifying and beautiful. At home, evening Katherine came home after a long day at the office, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked into the apartment. Lucas was already there, his white coat draped over the chair by the door, and his face was tired but softened with a smile when he saw her. "How was your day?" Lucas asked, setting down his bag. Katherine leaned against the doorframe, her hands resting on her lower back, busy as usual. "But, Lucas, I don't know how much longer I can keep up with this. I'm just so tired, and there's always something waiting for me at the office." Lucas walked over to her, concern written all over his face. "You need to slow down. You can't keep pushing yourself like this, especially with the baby coming." Katherine sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, but I feel like if I don't keep going, I'll lose everything I've worked for. The company, the legacy I've built. What if it all falls apart?" "Nothing's going to fall apart," Lucas reassured her, "but you have to trust that it's okay to take a step back. You can't be everything to everyone all the time. You need to focus on the family, on you." Katherine met his gaze, feeling a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by her doubt. "What if I'm not good enough at both? What if I can't be a good mother and still be the CEO they need me to be?" Lucas took her hands in his, pulling her closer. "You don't have to be perfect, Katherine. You just have to be present. We'll do this together, just like we've always done. You're not alone in this." Katherine's heart softened at his words. The weight of the world had always been on her shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe, to believe that maybe she didn't have to carry it all alone. "I'm trying, Lucas. I really am. But it feels like I'm losing control of everything." "You haven't lost control," Lucas said, his voice steady. "You've just been holding on so tightly to everything that you've forgotten how to let go. Let me help. Let's do this together." Katherine felt the weight she had been carrying for so long start to lift, just a little. She had spent so much time thinking she had to control everything, thinking that if she didn't push herself, she would fail. But Lucas was right. She didn't have to do this alone. "Okay," she whispered. I'll try to trust, to let go." The next week, preparing for parenthood, Katherine had scheduled a series of meetings with her team at Reynolds. Financial to finalize the last details of the company's international expansion. It had been a whirlwind week of preparing for the future and trying to make the necessary changes before her maternity leave began. Her pregnancy was becoming harder to manage, and she knew the time was drawing near. The baby would be here soon, and everything was about to change. She had spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, her team handling the heavy lifting as she worked to tie up loose ends. But as the hours passed, she realized something important. She didn't need to be the one with all the answers. She had built this company with a team that she trusted. They could handle it. Sitting in her office, Katherine closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, feeling a rare sense of relief. The decision to delegate more responsibilities had been difficult at first, but now it felt natural. She could still lead, but she didn't have to carry the burden alone. Later that night, Katherine and Lucas's apartment. Katherine walked into the apartment, the soft light of the evening casting a calming glow across the room. Lucas was sitting on the couch, his face lighting up when he saw her. They had spent the past few weeks focused on everything but their relationship, and tonight, for the first time in a while, Katherine felt like they had the space to reconnect. "How was your day?" Lucas asked, his voice warm. "Better," Katherine replied, smiling as she sat down beside him. "I think I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The team is handling things well, and I'm ready to take some time off when the baby comes." Lucas smiled, his eyes softening. "I'm proud of you. You've worked so hard to get to this point." Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of her decision finally lift. For the first time, she felt like she was finally embracing both the career she loved and the family she wanted to build. The balance wasn't perfect, but it was the first step. "I'm ready for this," Katherine said softly. "I'm ready for the next chapter. For all of it." New York City, the air was crisp with the first signs of autumn, and Katherine Reynolds stood at the window of her penthouse, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The skyline of Manhattan seemed to stretch endlessly, just like the journey ahead of her. For months now, she had been caught in the whirlwind of pregnancy, work, and the constant balancing act of her personal and professional life. And as her due date drew near, the weight of it all began to feel heavier. The days were no longer consumed solely by work, but by the anticipation of becoming a mother. As much as she had tried to prepare herself for this moment, nothing could truly ready her for the changes that were already happening within her, within Lucas, and within their future. The baby would arrive soon, sooner than she was ready for, and she knew that it would alter everything. But the question still lingered in her mind. How would she keep everything together? Could she continue to lead her company, be the CEO, and be the mother she wanted to be? She didn't have the answer, but for the first time, she wasn't as terrified of the uncertainty. She had learned, over the course of the last few months, that life wasn't about controlling everything. It was about letting go of perfection and embracing the chaos, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful parts of life came from the moments of surrender at the hospital. The day of the baby's arrival, it was an unusually quiet morning when Katherine and Lucas arrived at the hospital. The waiting room was calm, with only a few other families scattered around, each one with their own stories and anxieties. Katherine clutched Lucas's hand tightly, the nerves making her chest tighten. She hadn't felt this vulnerable in years. The journey she had started with so much certainty was now leading her into the unknown. "I'm nervous," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. She hadn't realized how much fear she was holding on to until now. Lucas looked down at her, his expression softening. "I know you are, but you're not alone in this. We're in this together. You've got this, Katherine. You've always been stronger than you think." Katherine squeezed his hand and smiled, the reassurance in his voice grounding her. "Thank you," she whispered. She had always been the one to hold everything together, but today, for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to do it alone. As they walked toward the delivery room, Katherine's mind briefly flashed back to the earlier days of her career when she had fought so hard for success. There had been times when she wondered if it was worth the sacrifices. But now, standing on the cusp of motherhood, she knew that the answer was yes. Success wasn't just about professional achievement. It was about family, love, and the ability to embrace all parts of life, no matter how difficult. Several hours later, after the delivery was long and exhausting, but when it was over and the soft cry of their baby filled the room, everything else faded away. Katherine's heart swelled as she looked down at the tiny human in her arms. This was her greatest accomplishment. This was the legacy she would leave behind, not just in the world of finance, but in the family she was creating. Lucas stood beside her, tears in his eyes, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "She's perfect," he whispered, looking down at their daughter. "You did it, Katherine. We did it." Katherine's heart ached with love and gratitude as she looked at him. They had done it, together. All the struggles, all the fears, all the doubts it had led to this moment, the most beautiful, overwhelming, and life-changing moment of her life. A week later, home when they finally returned home with their newborn daughter, the reality of parenthood set in. The house, once a place of quiet and productivity, was now filled with the sounds of crying, feeding, and the constant hum of new parenthood. There was no going back to the way things were. This was a new chapter in their lives, a chapter that would require change, flexibility, and a new sense of balance. Katherine found herself struggling to adjust. She hadn't realized how much her identity was tied to her work until she was no longer able to be the CEO 24/7. It was difficult, and the guilt of not being able to give her all to both her career and her family weighed heavily on her. But with Lucas by her side, they managed to carve out moments of joy and rest. He had taken a few weeks off from the hospital to help with the baby, and he was an incredible partner. Katherine marveled at how much he had grown as a father. The love and devotion he showed their daughter filled her heart with pride. One evening, as they sat together in the nursery, rocking their daughter to sleep, Lucas turned to Katherine and smiled. "You know, I think we're going to be okay," he said softly, watching their daughter's tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. Katherine smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. "Yeah, I think we are." It wasn't going to be easy. The balance between work and family was still a work in progress. But Katherine knew that she was no longer facing this challenge alone. She had Lucas, she had her daughter, and she had a newfound understanding of what true success meant. It was not about achieving it all at once, but about embracing the journey, with all its imperfections and moments of beauty.